It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, that big, beautiful bill that the House passed has now been moved over to the Senate. And what do you think the Republican response should be?
Well, what should the Republican response be? And I mean, the Senate is going to work through this bill, I think probably with a different set of views. I do want to say one thing before we launch into this. I'm about 10 days now into Italy. And one of the things that's striking to me is after 10 days, and the last few spent with a group of 10 other people, not one person has asked me about what's happening in Washington, D.C. A few have said, well, you must, find it very different than it was when you were there. I said, yes, I do. End of discussion. Not one Italian, when they always ask where we're from. And when we say Washington, D.C., not one of them expresses interest. And it's just struck me that, while we are following this so closely, I don't know, at least in the places I've been in Italy, we're just not a topic of conversation. Having said that, as Al and I both spoke, and I want to get Al into this fast because he's really more the student of the Hill than I am. But as we said, I think a week ago, while there was a great celebration about the House bill passing, it was only the beginning of a process. And it now shifts to the Senate. First of all, the math is important. There are 100 senators. Because this is going to be handled as a reconciliation measure, they need just a simple majority. So they need 51 votes. They have 53 Republicans in the Senate. 2 have already said they're likely to oppose a measure, but there's obviously still negotiations going on. So the margin for losing Republican senators is very small. You do have the vice president, of course, who would come in and break a tie vote if it got down to 50-50. My sense is that the Senate, first of all, doesn't have some of the same thoughts about the need to provide some of the tax breaks that are provided. And they also, I think, are very concerned about the size of the deficit that this would engender. So I would look at they're definitely going to make changes. I would look at some changes in tax relief. There's energy tax credits that some in the Senate feel very strongly about that the House stripped out of the budget. I wouldn't be surprised to see those go back in. I think the biggest problem they face is that they probably in the Senate want to add some things back in and will need to get the necessary votes from Republicans. But then that increases, if you're adding things back, that increases the size of a $1 trillion kind of deficit. And so it's going to be very hard to find the equation. I honestly think we're headed for a bit of a train wreck, assuming even that John Thune, the Republican leader in the Senate, could find a way to get the Republican votes in the Senate. You then have a bill that differs from the House and would have to go into a conference committee where there would be a negotiation over what stays in, what goes out. And then you have to get the Senate and the House members to agree again. And remember, the House members are dramatically split. With some of the conservatives wanting more budget cuts. Our own Congressman Andy Harris abstained because he said he thought the deficit was too large. Thank you, Andy. But I just think it's going to be hard to keep this together. Now, the other element in all of this is that in the House bill, they included a debt ceiling measure. This is important because the debt ceiling has to be raised, or we put the good faith and credit of the United States of America at risk. That is possibly going to happen in August, or by the end of summer, and at least. And so, the failure to be able to advance this by the end of July. They're hoping to do it by the 4th of July, but the failure to advance this, or if they have to come back after the 4th of July, means they're going to get into a whole debt ceiling debate as well. But that's another issue that has to be addressed. So there's an awful lot of headwind in all of this effort. And on top of that, you seem to have, again, from my perspective, from being a few thousand miles away, you seem to have a president that is just, more and more detached from the reality that most of us know. And his ability to deal with this in any consistent or measured way, I think, has to be called into question, because it's never going to get done without some clear leadership, in my view, out of the White House. And clear leadership from the White House is perhaps in short supply.
Al, what do Senate Democrats do? And more importantly, when do they start compromising?
Well, first of all, Craig, you're pretty lucky to be in Italy and not be contacted. I was in 1993. I thought I was safely hidden away in a little resort on the Rhine River in Germany when I got a call from the White House asking me to call Sam Nunn for his vote on the Budget Act. On the first Clinton budget. Look, what I think the Republicans ought to do is get a spine. Do what they know is right. I mean, you can hear all the bantering from various factions of the Republican Party. And I think, as a whole, the caucus has a pretty good sense that this is too expensive, that the deficit's too high, that the tax cuts are unrealistic, that the attempts to cut Medicaid and SNAPs and other programs for the poor in middle class are outrageous, that DOGE has been an enormous failure and they've driven the government into chaos. So they know what's right. And I think what they ought to do is finally get a spine, say, read the Financial Times that talks about Trump's new nickname of Taco. Trump, basically, that Trump always chickens out when there's pressure. I mean, what they've done so far on nominations and everything else is they just cave immediately, and so he doesn't have to, they don't never test him. And they ought to remember that a lot of them aren't going to be up until 2028, and some of them will be up in 2026. But Trump really, his threats are great in a vacuum, but he can't really afford to start primarying a lot of these people and take the risk of losing the House and the Senate. So he's not quite as all-powerful as they think. So I think they ought to do what's right. And what do I think they ought to do? I think they ought to basically, make it clear he doesn't have the votes to do it with Republicans alone. He ought to go begin talking to sensible Democrats, and there are plenty. And, they ought to take the lead, for example, from what Alyssa Slotkin said in her State of the Union response, and have a program that is responsible and not reckless for trimming the government and trying to focus on the highest priorities in government without destroying necessary programs, without killing the seed corn of America by cutting out all the research. They ought to come back with sensible tax cuts that are a little more fair and a little more responsible, and and then they ought to really come back with what I would call some sort of a modern Doge, a responsible Doge, and see if they can't put together a bill that would get enough bipartisan support, and then go back to the House and let them work it out.
Yeah.
It's not such an awful thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's what I think ought to happen. And I think both parties have a responsibility to try to make it happen. But I will also say, is if the Republicans cave and they just go along with Trump, then there's nothing the Democrats can do because they don't have enough votes.
Well, switching gears a little bit, Craig, in the good old days, presidential pardons were usually done on the last day of a president's term, usually at midnight. And now we have this completely new climate. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think the situation is more than a little out of control. Al has used the phrase reality TV, and it seems that, honestly, President Trump knows no limits when it comes to wanting to make news, even if it's making news about pardoning people who have been convicted of financial crimes, violent crimes. It's hard to understand exactly what motivates some of these, and I think he's doing it just to demonstrate he has the power to do it. This is one of the few unchecked things he has. And I do think he's getting more and more frustrated by the limitations that are placed on him. I mean, the tariff policy is now blocked by an act of a federal trade court, which is ultimately will go to the Supreme Court, but pretty strong arguments coming out of that court. He's being blocked by his attack on universities, being blocked on his attack of law firms. So he and the people around him clearly had a large menu of things they were going to launch within the first 100 days, and they launched it. But their proverbial missiles are not exactly hitting targets. And when we go back and add all this up, I have to think he's sitting there extremely frustrated. I mean, his comments to the media, telling reporters it's the nastiest question he's had. He was asked about the taco comment. Don't ever ask me that question again. He says, I've never heard presidents lose their composure, so quickly. And so I actually think this pardon effort is designed to be in the news every day, that you can release some other, convicted felon. And of course, it does seem to have a pattern where the people he's releasing are people who committed crimes similar to those to which he was indicted. I guess, he's thinking that, well, if he got off, he's going to let these other people off. I mean, it's unparalleled as far as I'm concerned. And it's a sad commentary. I can't imagine 3 more years of it.
Al, you have the final word this week.
These pardons are just absolutely outrageous. They're just outrageous. I agree with what Craig says about his motivation. I mean, this is a vindictive man. He's a vengeful man. He told us he was going to be retribution in this term, and that's what it is. He goes after his political enemies, wants to help his political friends. He's starting to be stymied in a lot of the crazy things he's done and the most outrageous things by the court. I think he's decided that time is not his friend, because the longer things go on, the more the checks in our system are going to restrain him. And so he's going after the worst people he can. I mean, I'm sort of waiting for him to do the pardon of Tony Soprano. He just pardoned one of the most notorious gangsters in the history of Chicago, somebody who ranks right up there with Al Capone, somebody named Larry Hoover. He doesn't even get anything. He's not going to get him out of jail because he's got so many state murder charges on him that he can't get out of jail. Still, I think it'll be in jail for 300 years. But he gets moved from a federal facility, and he was in the federal facility. I'm not an expert on the federal prison system, but that I understand, he was in the federal facility that I understand the most serious criminals are, the most dangerous criminals, El Chapo, people like that. I don't think anything's going to happen to the pardon system. I mean, I can't imagine the Congress, if it wouldn't step up to block somebody like Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, or Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, or Robert F. Kennedy, who wants to kill us all by eliminating vaccines. I mean, if they don't have the courage to step up there, they're not going to initiate some sort of a constitutional amendment to change the pardon system. So, it's going to go, it'll probably go on. He'll probably continue to use it in this outrageous way. I mean, whenever Trump does something, I must give him credit. I mean, for this, he knows how to stick to his message. Now, I think his messages are atrocious. I mean, I can't even find words to say how awful I think they are. But, for example, You know, he won't let refugees in from Afghanistan, but he brings them in from South Africa because he wants he is running every racial dog whistle he can find. You know, so he's going to continue to use the powers he has. So expect more pardons. You know, I gather he's now considering pardoning the people who were convicted of trying to assassinate Governor Whitmer in Michigan. He's already pardoned all of his cohorts on January 6th. In a real world, this would be absolutely criminal, and the Congress might even want to think about starting impeachment proceedings. But this isn't a real world yet.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much indeed. We will see you next week.